Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Survivor 44 following episode 11, and I feel like this was a good episode for the most part, and while my overall assessment of these players hasn't changed all that much, relatively speaking, I still think it's interesting to talk about where these players are going at this point, but there are 7 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 7, we have the boot from this week, but here we have Danny, and come on, we all knew this was coming. Danny had been set up for a downfall these last couple of episodes, and I feel like this was more of the same for him. Now, it was interesting seeing him trying to break up the Tikas here after he literally shut down that idea from Franny 2 episodes ago, which was pretty funny. Although he did explain it in his exit interview that he wants the numbers to be even, he wants to level the playing field, which sure, I guess, but even outside of that, he doesn't believe that Heidi was the one to vote for him last tribal, and obviously like him setting himself up as the person that's going to break up the Tikas just made it pretty clear that he was going to lose this battle. But even outside of that, he talked about how gameplay is different from friendship, again, tying it to him like playing very aggressively. There's no winning this game without being aggressive, but obviously it doesn't work out. He gets taken out on a plurality vote in a 3-2-2 vote, with 2 of those votes being canceled by an idol, so there's that. And on the whole, Danny definitely surprised me, where I felt like coming in, he talked so much about being compassionate that I felt like he wasn't going to play the game that hard, but it makes me think now that he probably just said that to put on an act, maybe as a joke, when in reality, he definitely surprised me, where he was pretty aggressive and he was sort of a funny little villain during a lot of this season. And from a gameplay perspective, he definitely had a lot more control than a lot of the other boots that have already come and gone this season, where he pretty much was the leader of the Soko Alliance for a lot of that season. He had a very close ally in Heidi, and in general, he was in the majority for most of the game. However, even then, like I do question some of his decisions, like the fact that he decided to play his idol on Franny, even though he literally admitted to Franny that he didn't quite trust her at that point, all in order to idol out Brandon, someone that you would think would be willing to work with him. But obviously, it seems that Brandon was pretty resolute in working with the Ratus, but even then, that's sort of a knock against Danny that he couldn't get Brandon to want to work with him. And obviously, the fact that he chose to idle out Brandon over someone like a Kane, someone that was a bit less willing to work with him moving forward. And even the fact that he even plays his idol to begin with is a bit weird there. I do question some of his logic during the season, and I feel like he didn't really do a good job of managing his threat level during a lot of it as well. So I feel like there are definitely holes within Danny's game, but he is one of the better games that we saw from this season. He is someone that had more control than a lot of these other players, but obviously he just eventually caught up to him, and because of that, he is here number 7. And with that, there are 6 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win based on their edit and current game position. But at number 6, we have the same person at the bottom of last week's ranking, but here we have Jamie. And not too much to say about Jamie here. I mean, she got that content early on about leading the meditation session. She talks about how deep down they're all a big family and that they're building real bonds, but they're still willing to play the game, which is pretty funny there. And she's obviously shown being willing to work with Danny to break at the Tikas, only for her and Lauren to eventually join the vote split plan with the Tikas to split the votes between Heidi and Danny, where obviously Danny goes out there. And again, I feel like this didn't really do much for Jamie. I feel like her fate is pretty much sealed at this point. I don't think she's going to get to the end, unlike certain other people we'll be talking about soon. But at the end of the day, I feel like there's just not much there for Jamie Nguyen, which is why she is here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have someone very similar to Jamie, but here we have Lauren. And really, again, it's the same spot as last week. I feel like Lauren is mainly here because there's less outwardly negative stuff to say about Lauren compared to Jamie, but still, this was a mostly quiet episode for her. Again, she's sort of working with Jamie in terms of working at the Tikas, only for them to not go through with the plan. They end up voting with the Tikas to take out Danny by splitting the vote. Again, not too much to say there. I will say Lauren's probably a bit more likely to get towards the end than Jamie, but realistically, I think she's also probably going to be cut before the end, which is why she is here number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and we have the same person in the spot as last week, but here we have Heidi. And I think of the people outside Tika, I think Heidi's probably the most likely to get to final tribal. However, even then, she's probably not winning. Now she does get her intro package here. She talks about like being about growth and how she moved to the mainland from Puerto Rico and that she worked hard and succeeded and that if you need to go the extra mile, she can do that. Like stuff like that. But even outside of that, we have Danny who doesn't believe that she was the one to vote for him at the last tribal. Like she is shown being part of the plan to target Carson, only for that to not go through, especially after Carolyn uses her idol there. And I feel like none that's particularly great. I feel like Heidi herself is probably on track to be a losing finalist, probably more so than Jamie or Lauren in my view. However, I feel like she got a bit more this episode, obviously getting her personal content, so that was enough to put her at number 4. But realistically, this bottom part of the list doesn't really matter all that much. So because of that, she is here number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and guess what? It's the same person that we had at number 3 last week, but here we have Carson. And I think this episode only further cemented that Carson's probably not getting to the end. He's probably going to be cut along the way. Now he does get some content earlier on about how like they need to get Carolyn back on their side, and they're able to do so. Talks about how the Tika 3 are dominating the game. But really outside that, I mean, I feel like this episode just provided more evidence that he's just not going to win himself. He obviously is targeted at this tribal after Jan Jan wins immunity. Talks about how this is the first time that he's being targeted and that he doesn't like it. And he is given some content of him trying to save himself, but really, I feel like Carolyn was getting more of the credit there with her like getting her idol involved. And we got another moment with Carson in front of the fire with the flames literally reflecting off of his glasses. So yeah, I think Carson's probably going to lose fire, if not even be cut before that. So I feel like because of that, I can't really have Carson any higher than number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and I feel like this is where the main source of intrigue came with this particular episode, where despite the order not being different, I think it's a bit closer now than what it was before. But at number 2, we do have Carolyn. And again, I did have to leave Carolyn at number 2. However, this was still a relatively good episode for her. Now, she does get some questionable content where she's obviously very upset after the Franny tribal, and we even see some of the reactions from the other players, and they seem like, yep, that's Carolyn for you. She's so emotional. And then Carolyn herself even seems to like reinforce that by saying that she is a very emotional player and that she can't play the game 24/7. However, you can also argue that this is positive given that she recognizes that it was probably a good move to take out Franny and that she knows what's best for people's games. It's just that her like emotions need time to catch up to that reality. And then even later on, she gets that segment of her going fishing, and even though she says that she can't do the game 24/7, like she enjoys having fun and that she enjoys the experience of it all and that she likes spending her time with Jam Jam. And I feel like that just reinforces to me that both Carolyn and Jam Jam are pretty much locked to get to final tribal at this point. I can't really see a world where they can't get to the end together at this point. Unless like Jam Jam loses fire, but again, I already talked about that. I think Carson is clearly being primed for that role. So I feel like there's that to consider. And then later on in the episode, she does get quite a bit of credit for like the actual move here of saving Carson. Now, some of that is circumstantial given that, well, she had an idol and that she played the idol, but it was still shown being pretty heroic on her end. She got content last episode setting up like her eventually targeting Danny, and then she falls through on that. She is right there. Now, we do get the tribal where there is a bit of a questionable decision where she initially writes down Lauren, but then crosses it out and writes down Danny's name, sort of pulling an Aubrey here. And I think from a pure game perspective, this is not a good move. I mean, it's not good jury management. You come off as indecisive. Plus, you potentially piss off Lauren for no reason. So I think that's not particularly great. But you could argue that this was a good game move as well, as if she did vote for Lauren, then that would have resulted in a 2-2-2 tie, assuming that the idol isn't played. And if the idol is played, then that just increases the probability that that works out for her. So you can make a debate either way, like whether this is good or bad for her. But I still feel like this was definitely a better episode for Carolyn than what I was expecting. I feel like if Carolyn were the runner-up, then she probably would have been undercut a bit more by this point, as this is usually the part of the season where like the runner-up starts to get really undercut here. But the fact that Carolyn is still getting positive content here, and the fact that the show is still propping up like her gameplay style and that she's still like getting a chance to explain it, does make me think that she still has a bit of a chance, and that maybe if she got to the end with Jam Jam, that it could potentially be a close jury vote. Now, at the end of the day, I still think Jam Jam's probably gonna squeak it out, but I still feel like this was a good enough episode for Carolyn to where she is here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor 44 at this point is still Jam Jam. Now, you can definitely debate this one a bit more, as Jan Jan did not have the best episode in the world here. Like, he literally says earlier on that he wants to target Lauren or Jamie next, only for that to not go through. Carolyn clearly gets her way there. And you can even debate whether his content at the beginning of the episode is that good, considering that Carolyn is very upset at him for voting out Franny, and he obviously tries talking to her, but she doesn't immediately reciprocate that. Now, that is rectified the next day, where he does ultimately talk to her and they seem to smooth things over. Carolyn is fully back on board. And then later on, he's shown being targeted, only for him to win immunity. And they did the last gasp here, which was a bit questionable as well, considering what happened last season. Although Jeff explained on the podcast that he believes that the challenge normally works and that for what happened in 43 was just an exceptional circumstance, but whatever. But I feel like this win from Jan Jan was so foreshown, where early on Jeff talks to Jan Jan about this challenge and how he feels experienced for it. And really Jan Jan just wins this challenge with ease, to the point where at the point where he wins the challenge, he doesn't even know that he won because he was so in the zone. Danny literally had to jump into the water to let him know that he won the challenge. And I feel like, again, it was very predictable there. I feel like it was really there to prop up Jam Jam, which I think ties back into Jam Jam, where obviously last episode we got that moment of him talking about his family, even though he lost the reward challenge, and that he was pretty upset about that. And I feel like the fact that Jam Jam wins this challenge as this very big moment right after he was seen as a potential target, I think shows that the show is really going out of its way to make Jam Jam the main character there. Now, yes, he still technically doesn't get his way here in wanting to target Lauren or Jamie, but still works out gameplay wise. I feel like it's definitely closer now between Jam Jam and Carolyn, considering that despite those positives, this was not the best episode in the world for Jam Jam. I feel like it was probably a better episode for Carolyn. And at this point, I think I'm a bit more 50-50 on who's going to win. Now, I feel like it's pretty clear at this point that both Carolyn and Jam Jam are going to get to the end together. It's just a matter of who's going to win that jury vote. I feel like this has a lot of potential to be like a Wendell and Dom situation, where maybe they both get to the end together and it's just going to be like this close jury vote or something. I think my gut instinct says that Jan Jan's more likely to win a jury vote. I feel like Jan Jan's more likely within the game to get a jury vote. And I feel like looking at his edit, I feel like there's more clear instances of Jan Jam having a winner's edit. I feel like there are more, I guess, subtle ways in which Jan Jam is being propped up. Whereas I feel like Carolyn has been getting all these moments of her talking about her game. And you can make the argument as well that Carolyn's edit is more journey than her having the story that leads to her culminating in a win. At this point, Carolyn is the one that's saying that she wants to get to the end with Jam Jam, which definitely makes me think that Carolyn is putting her personal feelings first over her game, to where potentially by the end, she could be just fine letting Jam Jam win by any means. Or it can mean that Carolyn could set things up where she could try to eventually undercut Jam Jam by the end of it. I still think there is room for things to shift around, but if I had to pick one person to win between Carolyn and Jam Jam, I still lean Jam Jam over Carolyn, just based off my gut feeling and based on what we've been seeing both in the game and based on the edit. So I feel like for the time being, I do have to lead Jam Jam here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps out with the channel. Now that Big Brother Canada is finished, I'm going to be doing a player ranking for that, so stay tuned for that. I'm still covering Survivor 44, where we'll have one more power ranking, followed by a jury scenarios video, and then it's the finale, believe it or not, so we'll be having some postseason coverage for that, so stay tuned for that. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which you can join by clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way. But for now, that's the video. See ya.